of the purposes of getting an airplane was I wanted to be able to give back, because we've been blessed and we've been blessed to bless others. And so that was a priority. I've always, loved airplanes and being around airplanes. So when I graduated high school, I was with my mom, and I didn't do well in high school. I never cracked a book open. I didn't study. I just barely got through. So my wife and I, we go back to Texas often, and we have family back in the Panhandle, and it's either an 11-hour drive or it's a 2-hop flight on the airline, and sometimes that takes 7-8 hours on the airline because we fly non-red, and if you get bumped off a flight because it's full, then it could be quite a while. I had fun turning wrenches. It was enjoyable. I worked on F-18s, and the military is very kind of specialized. You don't work on either A or P or electronics. I worked on ejection seats, pressurization, pneumatics, and a couple of other subsystems. And that was enjoyable every single trip. There's been a beautiful sunset or beautiful sky, mountains, something. Flying in the Pacific Northwest and Mount Rainier on a beautiful sunset. I'll just mention to the guy I'm flying with, or gal, this job sucks, doesn't it? And it's, obviously it's just a joke, and they laugh and they go, yeah, this job sucks. It's been a wonderful career so far. Yeah. So I took my first couple of lessons at a very young age because my dad, he and my uncle, they owned an airplane together, and Dad became an airline pilot when I was about 10. So at 13, he had one of his friends from the airline who was an instructor. He took me up in a 150, and it was a structured lesson.
What do you want to be when you grow up? Seems like a simple question. And for some people, they know the answer to that, sometimes from a really young age. For others, you kind of have to figure it out. What about for you? Are you doing what you want to do with your life? Have you become what you want to become? Today's guest, David Boggs, is a great example of someone who knew what they wanted to do and to become, but the path to getting there wasn't necessarily in a straight line. I think you're going to love the conversation that I have with David Boggs today, and I hope that you'll find a few little things that help you wherever you are in your journey of discovering who you want to be when you grow up. David, you took your first flying lesson when you were 13, but then it was not until 14 years later that you actually got your pilot's license.
Right.
Tell me about how you ended up taking a lesson in 13. I think that would be awesome. But then what happened in between 13 and 27 that becoming a pilot was delayed for you?
Yeah. So I took my first couple of lessons at a very young age because my dad, he and my uncle, they owned an airplane together, and Dad became an airline pilot when I was about 10. So at 13, he had one of his friends from the airline who was an instructor. He took me up in a 150, and it was a structured lesson. It wasn't just let's go up and fly. It was a lesson, and it was so much fun, and I really enjoyed it. It was a windy day in Texas, in Killeen, Texas, and he pointed it into the wind and did some slow flight. We put the flaps out, and then he says, "Look down," and I looked down, and we're going backwards, and it was just a lot of fun. But my parents had split up about that time, and we moved back with my mom, and living with my mom and stepdad, they didn't make much money. We were really poor. My mom and stepdad made $7,000 one year when I was about 15.
Wow.
So yeah, how she kept 3 boys fed. I don't know, but we never went hungry, but we certainly didn't have money for um, lessons or anything like that. So it wasn't until I got out of high school and joined the Navy. I was an aircraft mechanic in the Navy. I took a few more lessons, but I was still too young and wanted to have fun with my friends. And that didn't leave any money left over for lessons. So it wasn't until I got out of the military that I got my pilot's license.
There's a lot there that I would love to unpack with you, David. Your dad, if you were already 10, did he start flying later as well? Seems like he must have been a little bit older when he started
He
that.
was a
And
little bit older, yeah. So I'm not sure when he started exactly, but I know he was a young man. He and his brother owned a Citabria together, and that's when I was very young. I was just a baby, and Dad was 21 when I was born. So he had an airplane with his brother when they were younger, but then he fell out of it. He did a lot of different things. He was an entrepreneur. We had a restaurant. He tried his hand at Tom's Candy franchise, and then the restaurant we had in the late '70s was in Fort Collins, Colorado, and it was just barely getting by. And at that time, his older brother had got on with an airline, and his older brother said, "Get all your ratings and get down here." So Dad went flying every single day back when the VA paid 100% because he had been a medic in the Army.
okay.
So yeah, so the VA paid 100% of your flight training back then, and he went flying every day, got all his ratings, and as soon as he got his ratings, they hired him down at Rio Airways in Killeen, Texas, in 1979. We moved down there on Thanksgiving Day. And I remember it was Thanksgiving Day because in the middle of nowhere, we stopped at a gas station that had a little convenience store. And that was there wasn't any restaurants open on Thanksgiving Day back in the 70s. So they had turkey hot dogs, and that was our Thanksgiving dinner that year.
And that all happened prior to your parents splitting up, or they were still together at that time and then they split up later?
Yeah, they were still together when we moved down to Killeen, Texas, and they split up about a year or two later.
Do you know if did his aviation career have an effect on that? I know it can be hard sometimes on families when, the one or other, the spouses is gone frequently.
Right.
Do you know if that played a factor in that separation? And if so, how did that inform your decision making and as you became an airline pilot and made family decisions?
Yeah. I don't believe it did for my parents. Um, his first airline job, he was home every night. Most nights he was home. Uh, like a lot of the commuter, um, the turboprop commuters back then, it was out and backs, and so every night you were home. Um, my parents, they had issues before he ever became an airline pilot. Um, and they split up. It was amicable when they split up, but uh, mom went back to California, and dad he ended up flying for 8 different airlines. Um,
Wow.
so he moved around a lot, and that kept us moving around as kids because we'd go back and forth between mom and dad. Um, it was supposed to be there was 3 boys, and supposed to be one of us would stay with dad for a year and we'd just switch off. It didn't quite work out that way, but that's kind of the way it worked out. So no, I just knew as a little kid that that was just the coolest thing ever. Like most boys, I want to be a race car driver or an airline pilot or an astronaut, something like that. But having a dad that was an airline pilot just made it that much cooler to me as a little kid. So I've always loved airplanes and being around airplanes. So when I graduated high school, um, I was with my mom, and I didn't do well in high school. I never cracked a book open. I didn't study. I just barely got through. So it was, and mom and dad being poor, it was join the military or flip hamburgers. So I joined the military.
And it sounds like your family has a tradition of military service. You served in the Navy. You mentioned that your dad had also served. And I know prior to recording, we were talking about the picture of your grandfather. Can you talk about how both your grandfather's service and your dad's service influenced that decision for you?
Yeah, it was an influence, and it was more of a necessity though. I was very proud to know that, my grandfather had served, during World War II, and I've always been interested in that, in history, and especially that era, 1940s and World War II. But then my dad also had served, so there's pride in knowing that that's family history. But for me, it really came down to, what am I going to do now that high school's over? Um, I certainly didn't have grades for any kind of scholarship in college, and we didn't have the money anyway. So, and we lived in a little town in California that I had no desire to stay in, and so it was join the military. It was kind of came down to that choice, and I happily did it. I joined the Navy, and my career path was going to be in aviation. Before I signed up, I got it in writing that I was going to be an aircraft mechanic. And while I was in boot camp, I went to boot camp in San Diego. The Navy SEALs at that time, there's no more boot camp in San Diego for the SEALs, but this was in 1986. Um, the Navy SEALs were in charge anytime we went to the swimming pool or anytime we had any kind of a PT test, a physical training test. And so you look up to those guys. They're like Superman, and I had no idea exactly what they did or how they got chosen to be SEALs. One day we were at the swimming pool. We were doing some survival training. And after the end of the survival training, they said, okay, now what we're going to do is tryouts for the SEALs. Anybody can try out. You do 10 laps in the pool, get out, put your boots on, run a mile and a half in under 15 minutes, and then 9 pull-ups. And there's no breaks in between, and there's no time limit on the swim. And I thought, wait a minute, you can just be a SEAL? Anybody could just be a SEAL? So I tried out for it. Just a handful of us tried out for it. We're standing at the shallow end of the pool, and the SEAL says, you can do any combination of the 3 survival strokes. When you come back to the shallow end, do not touch the bottom of the pool. Go. So I start swimming, and I'm not a strong swimmer. I don't swim well at all, but I know I can do the run, and I know I can do the pull-ups. And there's no time limit on the swim, so just take my time. So I start doing freestyle, which is kind of like this. And that's not a survival stroke, but I didn't know that. And we get down to the end. I turn around, head back to the shallow end, and the SEAL, he's yelling at me because I'm not doing a survival stroke. But I'm not sure if he's yelling at me or if he's yelling at the guy to my left or to my right. And I thought, well, maybe he's not yelling at me. And if I stop and I stand up, then I'm done for sure. So I touched the wall and I turned around and came back. Well, he jumps in the pool and he grabs me out of the pool by my shorts, and I'm still going like this. That's not a survival stroke. You're done. So that was the end of my SEAL career. Just 1 lap in the swimming pool, which is just as well because I'm here now. Who knows what I'd be doing if I knew what a survival stroke was.
I was sitting here in great anticipation thinking, wow, David became a Navy SEAL. How did you choose the Navy? Obviously, there's options for ways to serve, and that wasn't
Right.
Where your family had served. So what led you to that decision?
Yeah. Gosh, to be honest, I've never thought much about that and why it was the Navy. I kind of felt like the Marines, uh, they were just probably a little bit too tough. That's not me. The Air Force, a little too weak. That's not me. No, I'm just kidding. To anybody in the Marines or Air Force. Yeah, it just, gosh, I don't know. I don't think I have an answer for that. It was just like I chose the Navy. um, because they were willing to make me an aircraft mechanic. So it was, aviation was my path. So it came down to Air Force or Navy, and I don't remember why I didn't go with the Air Force.
And how long did you serve in the Navy, David?
I did 4 years active duty, and so when I signed up, it was an 8-year commitment, and so I did 4 years active duty and then 4 years inactive duty. And inactive duty, all that meant was if there was another world war, they'd call you back. So after my 4 years of active duty, um, that was pretty much it. And I was I was in California the whole time.
And then once you got out of the Navy, did you go right into flying from there, or was there another period of, I'm not really sure what I want to do with myself, or had you figured that out and you went straight into training?
No, I was still figuring it out. I had fun turning wrenches. It was enjoyable. I worked on F-18s. And the military is very kind of specialized. You don't work on either A or P or electronics. Um, I worked on ejection seats, pressurization, pneumatics, and a couple of their subsystems. And that was enjoyable, but I knew I wanted to get into the cockpit like my dad. So when I got out, I went to a little school in Oakland, California, to get my dispatcher rating. And that was about a 4-week course. Um, and what I didn't know at the time was no airline hires out of these schools. They have so many people that already work, the big airlines, they already work for them on the ramp or in other positions, and they find out about dispatchers, and they find out that it's not too hard to get your dispatcher rating. So they have plenty of people that apply from within. So once I finished the program, I got my dispatcher rating. To get my foot in the door, I got on with America West Airlines. This was in 91, 92, and they had their own security people. So I got on as a um, security guard. They called it corporate security. So we did passenger screening, just like the TSA does now. And we also did what I call the rent-a-cop type stuff. They had airplanes parked at Goodyear Airport, and I would go over there, drive my car out to Goodyear. I had a code to get onto the ramp and drive my car out on the ramp and sit there and watch airplanes turn to rust for about 8 hours and make sure nobody was messing with the airplanes. And that lasted for all of about 9 months. And then the Gulf War I happened, and they laid off a bunch of people, got laid off. And so I went to work for Airborne Express. I did a little bit of everything for Airborne Express. I was a load master on the DC-8, and I delivered freight. And at that time, I got my private license out at Glendale Airport. And then I found out about Mesa Airlines' ab initio program. They had a program out in Farmington, New Mexico, and I went to that in 95. And 2 years later, I was sitting in the right seat of a Beech 1900.
David, you said that in high school you never opened a book. And then as we've been talking since then, I see this like the next decade of your life is just continual learning. Was it what they were teaching in high school that you didn't enjoy? Did you develop a love for learning later? I'm just really curious because, and some of the preparation questions I sent, one of the things that you mentioned that you like about aviation is that you'll always be learning. So I find it interesting that you take a high school kid who really didn't seem to have much interest in learning at all, and now that's changed. So how would you explain that?
Yeah, I think I always did love learning, even as a young kid. I think it was just what we were learning, and uh, it was being not motivated. I don't know exactly why I wasn't motivated in school. I certainly wished that I was. when I joined the military and they sent me off to A&P school, um, there was motivation. Whoever graduated top of the class got to pick orders, and it went down from there. So the top of the class got to pick his wish from the list of orders, and the guy in the bottom of the class got what was left over. So I was highly motivated, and I got top of the class. And I think in high school, for whatever reason, I just wasn't motivated. So yeah, I've always loved learning. I'm always reading something about history, and I got back into flying small airplanes last year, and that's been a great relearning experience.
What's the biggest challenge coming from flying for the airlines and then now flying small airplanes or general aviation, in your opinion?
The biggest challenge is just getting back into it. I'd say probably only maybe 10%, and that's just a guess. Airline pilots fly small airplanes. Um, I don't know why that is, but because I think we all still love it when we talk about it. It's just one of those things like, well, maybe I'll get to it. And so last year, finally, I got to it, and it was a learning curve getting back into it. I could be in moderate to severe turbulence in a 737 for hours, and I'll be fine. But we're here in Phoenix, and I went back in June, and I knew flying this little airplane is going to get me airsick, and sure enough, it did. So I had to redevelop, the tolerance for that, and then the approaches at such a slow speed. That takes a little bit to get used to again.
Now, David, you bought what I think is kind of a unique airplane. There's in general aviation, there's a lot of people that are flying a Cirrus or a Beechcraft Bonanza or something else, but you bought something that I think is kind of an iconic airplane. You want to tell us about the airplane that you own and how you decided on purchasing that airplane?
Sure. Um, so my wife and I, we go back to Texas often. Um, and we have family back in the Panhandle, and it's either an 11-hour drive or it's a 2-hop flight on the airline, and sometimes that takes 7-8 hours on the airline because we fly non-rev, and if you get bumped off of flight because it's full, then it could be quite a while. So I was able to talk the wife into getting an airplane because it'd be so much faster to get there in a little airplane. And so we looked at something that you can travel with cross country, and my budget was 110 or 150,000, and so it means an older Mooney or an older Bonanza. And I had never actually seen a 195 in person, just on the internet, and of course, they're just beautiful airplanes. And initially, I thought it's going to be too expensive. Look at that big radial engine; it probably burns 25 gallons an hour, But I looked into it, and it's actually affordable, and they don't burn that much an hour compared to, very comparable to a Bonanza. Then the next problem was, well, how do I take care of this thing if I do get it? I don't have an A&P, even though I know how to work on them. So I need somebody that can fix it. And there's a couple places here in the valley that can do that. So then it became, well, can I insure it? And initially, the first insurance quote I got was $8,500. That's not even close to compared to, if I got a Mooney or Bonanza. So I thought, okay, well, 195 is not going to happen. But then I got a hold of a friend that he's also a Southwest guy. He knew somebody that had great insurance quotes, and I ended up getting reasonable insurance. So then it was a matter of finding one. And there was the one I got was up in Portland, Oregon. The guy who owned it, was a terrific guy. He had really taken good care of the airplane. He was an engineer by trade, and he was also a CFI, which was terrific because I needed 10 hours of dual instruction for my insurance. So he gave me the 10 hours of instruction. I was able to pick up trips at work with long overnights in Portland, and I'd get up early in the morning and we'd go fly. Um, I still call it his airplane sometimes. Like, we'd go up and fly the airplane, and at the end of going and doing a bunch of touch and goes, we'd fly over to the Portland airport and drop me off, and then I'd go to work, and that's how I got my 10 hours, and it's been great.
How does your wife feel about the flying in a small airplane? I know that there's a lot of my wife does not enjoy flying, and so very infrequently will go with me.
Right.
And that's for a lot of reasons. She had an uncle who was killed in a small plane crash, and so there's that, and a lot of other little things with her. But how is that for your wife?
Yeah, I think probably similar. She's not real keen on it. We went to Sedona once. I took her, two of her sisters and her mom, and I wanted to go to Sedona. It was because it's so beautiful, right? This would be a good first trip for somebody who's a little bit nervous, because I can't think of a more beautiful place to go to. So we went up there, and she did well. Turning base to final, though, she kind of gets wide-eyed and grabs my leg, she doesn't like any kind of abrupt moves. So that was the only part that she didn't really care for too much. And I did take it to the Panhandle of Texas a couple of times. We have a brand new grandbaby, and he was born in Texas, and I flew back there once by myself. My wife was already there, and then I went once with my stepmom. I took her back there. So my wife hasn't been with us on cross country yet, and unfortunately, the airplane's been down since February. We're putting a new motor in it, and one of our mechanics, he's also a Southwest mechanic, and he's a busy guy, so it's been a slow process, but it's been a great process because I've been helping out. I really got to get to know the airplane inside and out.
As you look over your flying career, both with the airlines and now general aviation, are there highlight moments that stand out in your mind that just that maybe help explain your love for aviation and for flying? For me, I can think of some. Flying over the harbor in San Diego is one of the things that I love doing. You're at 400 or 500 feet, and you're looking at the aircraft carriers and the other ships that are there, the small boats that are transitioning in that harbor. Have there been experiences like that for you that just really stand out in your memory as the where you feel joy for aviation?
Um, I can't at the moment like pinpoint one thing that's like that, but almost every single trip that I'm on at work, and I go to work, on average once a week. I'll do a 3-day trip on average. Every single trip, there's been a beautiful sunset or beautiful sky, the mountains, something, flying in the Pacific Northwest and Mount Rainier on a beautiful sunset. And I'll just mention to the guy I'm flying with, or gal, this job sucks, doesn't it? And it's, obviously it's just a joke, and they laugh and they go, yeah, this job sucks. It's been a wonderful career so far. Still have 7.5 years to go before I turn 65, and I plan, God willing, to keep going. Now that I've got a little bit of tailwheel time, hopefully by the time I'm 65, I'll have a lot more tailwheel time, and the plan is to go up to Alaska and go, fly a beaver up there or something like that. We'll see what happens, but I can't pinpoint one thing, is because there's been so many. I've seen some amazing things. I've seen a complete rainbow, 360-degree rainbow. I've seen the the northern lights that felt like if we had just climbed up to another 1,000 feet, we'd be right in there. Of course, we'd have to go another 100,000 feet. We wouldn't even be close, but that's what it felt like when we saw it. I've seen um, St. Elmo's fire where it was just so amazing. It looked like plasma coming off the nose instead of sometimes you see the little arcs of light. It looks like tiny little lightning bolts, but it looked like plasma coming off the radome. And
Wow.
and I've seen terrible things. I've seen thunderstorms that were so full of lightning, like in any 1 second, for as long as we could see it. We could see it off on the horizon until the time we passed by. It must have been 30 minutes. And there was not 1 second when there wasn't at least 5 lightning bolts inside
Wow.
inside this big supercell. And I said, wow, that's beautiful, but I hope nobody's getting hurt down there. But sure enough, I listened to the news, and the next day, 5 people had been killed. We flew
Wow.
right over. We flew right over the World Trade Centers the week after. It was the very first day LaGuardia opened back up, and we flew right over Manhattan, and you could look down and see the mess that was there, and it was still smoldering. So, yeah, I've been very blessed to see some amazing things in my career.
So, David, there was not that long ago, I went through a difficult period in my life after losing my dad. And I still have a note card where I wrote down that there were 3 miracles at that time, is what I consider them, but 3 miracles that I needed God to give me. It was happiness, prosperity, and purpose. You've obviously experienced some extremes in prosperity. I don't, having your Thanksgiving dinner as being a turkey hot dog, and then having a single mom trying to raise 3 boys. Being an airline pilot is a great career and leads to prosperity if you're financially wise, which it sounds like you have been. Do you feel like the prosperity or lack thereof that you've experienced has had an effect on your ability to be happy, or how do you feel about the interplay between those 2 things?
Oh, absolutely, I do. Um, when you don't have much as a kid, you don't realize that you don't have much when you're a kid. It just is what it is. It's not until you get a little bit older, junior high, high school, and you realize other kids have and you don't.
Mm.
And that can be hard as for a kid. But then, as a struggling single guy when I was young, um, I always knew that I could make it because, if my mom could feed 3 boys, making more money than I was making as a young single guy, I could make it. And I always knew that someday I'd be an airline pilot. That was something that I knew was going to happen. It took me longer than I would have liked, but yeah. So when I got there, at first it wasn't that easy. My first year flying right seat of a turboprop, I made $15,000. So it wasn't, it's not like, you suddenly you've made it. It was still a little bit of a struggle, but it wasn't too bad because I was single and I didn't have any kids or anything like that. So I've already forgotten the question. Forgot where I was going with all that.
Well, the question was just the interplay between happiness and prosperity,
Right.
and how if you felt those things were connected in your life.
Yeah, I do think that when you've been in a place in your life where you don't have prosperity, and then later on when you do have prosperity, it does make it easier because I think maybe if I've always had it, I'd worry about losing it, and I don't worry about losing it because I've been in a place where I didn't have it, and that's not the end of the world. And that's not what life is all about anyway.
David, that's a great segue into what is life all about, which is purpose. What would you say the purpose is for you? And um, was that something that you've always known, or did it, for me, I feel like it took me a little while to figure out my purpose. Um,
Yeah.
how about for you?
Yeah, it took me a while to figure it out too. I have a great story about purpose that involves my kids. So when I was still in the military, I was 21 years old. I had a muscle car, and in high school, kids called me Steve McQueen because I drove like a crazy man. And I was driving my car thinking I'm Steve McQueen on this dirt road, and I lost control. And to the right is a canal, and it's about a 12-foot drop into the water. And I was going off that canal. I was going to hit the water. And there was a moment in time where I heard everything. In my mind's eye, I heard everything anybody ever said to me all at one time. And in that
Mm.
singular instant, I understood everything that everybody ever said to me. Uh, and the car was definitely going off into that ditch. But there was a miracle. The car stopped, and I immediately felt the presence of an angel outside my car. And I sat there for a while. Um, I uh, I never had a huge rush of adrenaline. I just felt very calm. And in that moment, I just knew that I had been saved by an angel. And growing up, we never went to church. I didn't think too much about religion. My family wasn't religious. I did believe in God because my mom, at a very early age, we'd say our prayers every night, and so I always believed that God created everything, but I didn't ever think much about it. We never really went to church. So it wasn't until decades later I had my little girls. I have two girls, and when they were about 4 or 5 years old, I'd tell them that story. And I'd say I'd never understood why I was saved until you came here. And now I understand why I was saved so that you could be here. And my oldest, she's pretty sharp. She says, well, what am I supposed to do? And at the time when they were that age, I didn't have an answer for her. You know, the answer was, well, to live a good life. But now I've figured it out, and it's to live a good life and following in the steps and the preachings of Jesus. To me, that's the purpose. It's to glorify God.
What was So you go from that informative, great question from your kids, and I love that. Um, what was the process from there? Because it seems to me like that might start some wheels turning, but that's a long way from the wheels are turning to now really defining that purpose.
Um, what was the process? Uh, Going through a divorce
Hmm.
was a catalyst. My first wife and I, we weren't in a very good place for a long time. I wasn't into going to church or, learning about the Bible or anything like that. I had read the Bible when I was 13. I read the first two books of the Bible. And when I was 13, I thought, well, this seems kind of silly because God was there. God came down and spoke, and he was visible. He parted the waters, but these silly people still did whatever they wanted. And I didn't realize I had done the same exact thing. He, he stopped my car, and I still was just doing my own thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so after I got divorced, it was a lot going on at that time, and I decided that it's finally time for me to uh, stop doing my own thing and doing what I wanted, and just listen to God and find out the path He has for me.
Do you feel
So
like your life has been happier after discovering that purpose? What changes have you seen in yourself?
for sure, it's been happier. And I haven't thought of why exactly until you just asked that question. Because a big part of why it's happier is my first marriage was not a good place, and
Hmm.
right after that I started going to church, and it probably would have been happier uh, if I hadn't uh, dedicated myself to the Lord, just because I wouldn't have been in a marriage anymore. But I think even if I decided, not to follow God and just kept doing my own thing, um, it wouldn't have been nearly as good as it is now with God.
David, as you and I both volunteer for Angel Flight West, tell me how, for me, I discovered charitable flying pretty quickly after I started flying, and it really informs a big part of my purpose, um, is using the gifts that God has given me, and specifically in rewinding the tape a little bit, the last several years He has provided what I was asking for: happiness, purpose, and prosperity. Um, I feel a real responsibility to use those things to give back to others. Um,
Yep.
how did you discover Angel Flight West or charitable flying, and what has that experience been like for you?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where I heard about it. I've known about it for an awful long time. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do. One of the purposes of getting an airplane was I wanted to be able to give back, because we've been blessed and we've been blessed to bless others. And so that was a priority. Um, I was fortunate enough to get one flight in before my airplane went down, and that was one of the best experiences of my aviation career. I definitely put that up on the top, five flights. We three of us from different areas around the Phoenix Valley. We met up. We took off from different airports. We met up south, west of Phoenix, and we did a formation flight down to Yuma, and there was a family down there with a special needs child, and we circled around the airport, uncontrolled the airport a couple of times, and we landed, and one of the guys was dressed up like Santa Claus, and we delivered presents, and that was just a very special experience, and for everybody involved. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I can't wait for the airplane to be finished, and that's a fun process in and of itself, is putting a new motor in, um, but it's going to be even a lot more fun once get it up and going and do some angel flights. I'm looking forward to that.
I love those Christmas flights with Angel Flight West. There's all of the flights are great, and I have lots of different experiences with the flights that I've done. But there's something really special about showing up before Christmas, and helping a family that's going through a difficult time to enjoy a wonderful Christmas. Those have been some of my most memorable flights as well. I'm fortunate to have been able to participate in a couple of them now, and looking forward to December. In fact, for my wife and I, and this started before I started flying, but we decided years ago that Christmas to each other would be to do something for someone else. And then on
That's
Christmas
nice.
Day, we just tell each other about what we've done. And so, now we don't have to wait till Christmas Day to do it, but it still is fun with the kids there to share. hey, I took Christmas to this little girl that has cancer and her family, and to show them the pictures and video of what that means so that they understand that that really is the meaning of that season, isn't what you're receiving, but what you're able to give, and how you're able to help others, especially those that are going through a difficult time.
Right.
I end the podcast usually in the same way every time, David. My dad was a huge influence in my life, and losing him was difficult. On his headstone are the words, "Remember the little things." If there were just a few little things that you wanted your girls to remember that would help them to have happiness, prosperity, and purpose, what would those little things be that you would want to leave with them?
Wow, that's a really great story. I'd have to put some thought into that. Um, yeah, that's you touched on a very emotional subject for me, because I struggle right now with my youngest.
Mm-hmm.
My ex, um, she did her best to turn the kids from me. I was fortunate to find a wonderful woman after I got divorced, and I thought I'd never get married again, but the Lord put a wonderful woman in my life, and between the two of us, we have 5 girls, and she's got 3
Wow.
older girls, and I've got 2 girls, and so I'm struggling with my youngest right now. And so it's hard because there's very little happiness when she comes and stays here. Um, so yeah, um, I don't know how to answer that at this time, but I do know that I pray for her every day, and sometimes things don't happen on our time. It'll happen in God's time. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
David, I appreciate your vulnerability, and I can see that that is a sensitive and tender subject. Um, Having experienced the highs and lows of fatherhood, I also have 5 girls, so we share that in common. There certainly are seasons where relationships have been great. There's been relationships where seasons where those relationships have been more of a challenge. Um, and
yeah,
I think something that you expressed there maybe is one of those little things is maybe there's 2 there. And what came to my mind was I think that you would love for her to know that you love her regardless of other situations in life, and also that you desire her happiness. And um, I think sometimes, just as you said, things sometimes just take time. Life is a messy playground. It doesn't usually go the way that we imagine. And you can see
right,
threads of that in your story. Um, but I think with faith, with prayer and persistence, things will work out. And I certainly
yeah,
hope that's the case for you and in your relationship with your daughter. David, thank you for sharing part of your day with me and being willing to share your aviation, family, and life experience on the Plane Success podcast. I appreciate you.
yeah. Well, you're welcome, Alan. It's been a good time. Thanks for having me.